I begin this evening by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather tonight, land that remains unceded, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to First Nations peoples here with us tonight. So we've got a fascinating lineup for you tonight. If you're interested in freedom of speech and what's going on in Iran, Iraq and behind prison walls in places like China, and we're also going to learn about what's going on in Afghanistan and hear some writing from Afghani writers that's been written since the fall of Kabul to the Taliban, so it's quite new writing. But first, just a little bit about Penn, Sydney. We're one of more than 145 Penn centres around the world, and Penn was actually established 100 years ago this month. I'll tell you a bit more about our history a bit later. But we're all about keeping writers out of prison, protecting freedom of speech here and internationally, and fostering writing from the margins. And throughout the night, we'll explain for you how you can get involved with Penn and how we can pass on messages of support from you to writers at risk, writers who are in prison also. And you'll notice that one of the little windows, there's an empty chair. That's a Penn tradition. At every event that we hold, we have an empty chair for a writer who's in prison right now at the moment. And tonight it's a Uyghur writer, Halide Israel, and Fatimah Abdulghafur will tell us all about her in a few minutes. But first, Mark Isaacs, a former president of Penn Sydney, he's going to read us a short poem from Samai Hamed, the president of Penn Afghanistan. He managed to get out of Kabul before it fell, and he's now in Denmark working to get other writers out of Afghanistan. And this poem really goes to the heart of what Penn's about. Mark, thanks.
Thanks, Claudia. And correct me if I'm wrong, Claudia, but I believe this was written on the day the American troops withdrew from Afghanistan.
Yep.
Yes, this was written on the 31st of August 2021. For the last American soldier, goodbye, General. Greet your daughter from the girls of Kabul. Tell her about the colourful dance of kites as if they were the earrings of the sky. Tell her about the taste of Afghan food, which tastes like sweet adventures. Tell all mirrors are aquariums for fish that smile with children's lips. Don't tell the truth. Do not say that you shot dreams. Do not say that you have built new graves for human rights and children. Do not tell any facts about USA and Afghanistan. Let the diplomats wipe the blood from the roads with their tongues. Do not tell children anything about the fall of democracy from the plane, about pushing emotion into a hole full of rotten water, about the shouts you made to keep the children away. American children will be scared and they will doubt your humanity. Just say, our war is over. Let's play a new game.
Thanks, Mark. Very powerful poem there. Mark will be speaking in about 40 minutes about Afghanistan and in particular the time he spent there researching for his terrific book, The Kabul Peace House, about 5 years ago. We're going to have 4 speakers tonight, and if you have any questions, put them into the chat, but we'll save answering them until the end of the evening. So now I'd like to introduce you to Fatimah Abdulghafur. She's a Uyghur, she's a poet, an activist, and she's also a geophysicist. Her writing and her personal story have been featured in the New York Times and soon to be in the New Statesman, and also on an ABC podcast called Earshot. I had a little bit to do with that, and we'll give you details of that also in the chat. Hello, Fatima. So tell me, who are Uyghurs?
Hi, Claudia, and hi, everyone here tonight. I would like to actually share my screen with you, if it's possible, because I prepared a PowerPoint presentation for you. And yeah, can you see my screen?
No, it just says started sharing screen.
Okay, probably I'll just reshare. So, okay, here, can you see it now?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So, yep, thanks for listening to my introduction to Uyghur writers in Chinese occupied land, East Turkestan. So I titled this as Writers United because Uyghur means united. So Writers United also means Uyghur writers. So we are regretful here that today Halide Israel cannot be with us because she's imprisoned for writing. The Uyghur people, we are the traditional landowners of East Turkestan, and the East Turkestan is colonized by the Chinese Empire in 1884, and like the governments has changed, but the colonization has never ended up until now. So the very recent colonization, the continuation of the colonization is by the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, since 1949. So Uyghur language is our spiritual, academic, and daily life tool for us. There are about 12 million Uyghurs based on the statistics that currently living in East Turkestan. East Turkestan is also called with its colonial name or known as its colonial name Xinjiang in Chinese language, given in 1884 by the Qing dynasty. It basically means new territory. Among 12 million Uyghurs, there are about 3,000 Uyghur writers, or there were, at least before 2017. And about 1 million Uyghurs live in the diaspora. So this is our traditional dress called atlas. And as you can see from the background, this is the head, beautiful head, and also what girls are wearing. So we are from East Turkestan. Basically, I showed Google Map here. This is East Turkestan right here, you can see. And this is where we are, New South Wales. So, yep. It consists of 1/6 of the landmass of present day. I'm not gonna say I'm part of China, but unfortunately, because we are occupied, so still, like if you see this big land, we are 1/6 of this land. So very, very long story short, colonization started and legalized in 1884 in East Turkestan. Since then, in 1910s or 1920s, there was another government in China called Democratic or the Republic of China, and they did not end the colonization. And then there was a civil war between the Republic of China and the People's Republic of China, these two bodies. And in 1949, the People's Republic of China won the civil war. And then the Republic of China, which is present day Taiwan, they were kicked out. So all these three governments, they never ended the colonization and never stopped the oppression in East Turkestan. And Uyghur people are one of the main aboriginals in East Turkestan. So the oppression has never stopped. It was only progressing up until 2017, when the world actually came to know the word Uyghur. The very first things they knew or they heard about is the concentration camps, or in my language, it's death camps. Many news has been written about the concentration camps, and one of the very famous one is written by the Australian Policy Strategic Institute right on our land here. They have done a thorough research on the concentration camps and how many are there, and since when they started building. It never stopped up until now, and this is what we call, after the Holocaust, the largest camps ever built in human history, and it is still going on. So yes, so here you can see a map of concentration camps built up until 2020, and the database is still being updated, and this is what people look like. These are not criminals. they're just normal people, mostly Uyghurs, and they are taken to the camp. And the Chinese government firstly denied, saying that there is no camp, and then later on they say it's a re-education center, and then the more evidences we find about the camps, now the Chinese government can't hide it anymore. So this is how it looks on the right hand side, the camp, and it's definitely a prison. It's not a re-education facility. So since 2017, millions of people, like based on my knowledge, at least 5 to 8 million people have been incarcerated in the concentration camp, or later on to like detained in the prison. The UN says 1 million. It's from 2018, and since then many updates have been added. And I have known on personal account the camp survivors, and I know from their stories what horrific things happens inside the camp or in prison. But today I'm here to talk about the Uyghur writers, the intellectuals, the threat that Uyghur culture and language facing or has already faced, along with all other existential threats that we are facing in our own land. So the Uyghur writers, as I said, 3,000, around 3,000, and they never had peaceful history. The Uyghur writers were always the first target of any government crackdown because we are thinkers, and then we try to keep the culture alive by writing in Uyghur language. And the Uyghur literature is very rich literature. It's mostly, we love poetry, so it's 80% poetry in genre wise, and the fiction 15%, and the rest is other genres. So I'm also a poet, probably because of that. The poetry is like a pop music in Uyghur culture.
And there's a particular way that people, perform it or recite it and listen to it, isn't there?
Oh yeah, we call it mashrab, and yes, we always like, that's our way of like rap battle, Yeah,
It's a poetry battle.
Yes, the poetry battle. We always do that. Even the kids, like 3 years old, they can recite poetries, and like we always speak in rhyming language, so it's a very funny and silly thing. But yeah, that's who we are. So you would also find.
And with the poetry battle, are people performing their own original work, or they're performing the work of more famous poets?
Actually, it's more like folk poems, like pretty much everybody knows. If you're just a person, like not a poet, you would recite all those like, folk poems to have like contests with each other. But if you're a poet and if you're in like a, home environment, then we would definitely come up with our own original silly poems. Actually, it's very interesting. I just received a book called Contest of the Fruits. It's published in the United States. In that book, there is like the contest, like Battle of the Fruits, like 13 fruits. They were talking about who's better, who's like what. But we don't do it in like a fighting way. We just like make fun of each other. Everybody is equal. It's just a fun way of expressing ourselves.
Sounds like great fun.
Yes. So, but the Uyghur language is really banned from like all official uses, even like daily uses. The kids can't speak Uyghur language at home. They have to speak Chinese, and if they don't, they will be punished. And the China right now, the East Turkestan especially, has become a civilian state. So even at home, you are surveilled either by your smartphone, like openly, because they ask you to have certain apps, and outside, of course, everywhere is cameras, and there are numerous reports has been written, and if you search Uyghur, you can find really lots of news, especially after 2017. So majority of those 3,000 Uyghur writers and academics are imprisoned or put.
And the surveillance also takes the form of, some families have to have people living with them.
Definitely. It's not only like the camera, but it's called double relatives, like the Chinese, especially Chinese male. They were sent to the Uyghur female, and once the Uyghur female's husbands are taken to the camp, Chinese male literally move in with the Uyghur female, and they sleep on the same bed and everything.
Shocking.
And also, the camp is not only for the adults, but also there is a children's camp, orphanage camp, and it's also the news and the forced labor, the forced organ harvesting. Pretty much everything is forced. So this is like an example of how Uyghur language look like right now, because Uyghurs accepted Islam in 11th from 9th century starting, and up until now, like we are like majority of Uyghurs are Muslims, Sunni Muslims, and our present day alphabet is based on the Arabic alphabet, but it's a little bit different, like Urdu or Farsi. So
you're going to recite some
yes,
something from Halide, the writer on the empty chair.
Yes, definitely. And these are the Uyghur books that being burned, and this happens like very often. It just happened recently, and it always happens. And this is like the names of some of the names of the imprisoned writers. People wrote in artistic form. So this is Halide Israel. She was born in 1952, and we really don't know about her whereabouts after she was taken to the camp in around 2018. She's from the city I am from, and the city is known as one of the ancient civilized cities in East Turkestan. And because of that, maybe we have lots of like writers and poets born there. So she is a novelist, and her novels are like mostly talks about how like Uyghur families, Uyghur culture, and everything. She didn't write really like in a political sense that like she tries to wake up people or anything. But her last book is called The Golden Shoes. This book um, was published in 2016. And in this book, because she's now almost 70 years old, in this book, she actually reflected a lot about three Uyghur generations from 1950s to 1970s and today. Because in 1950s, there was another genocide uh, against Uyghurs. And then in 1970s, there was this cultural revolution, and then right now like again another genocide happening. So she reflected upon these three generations, and then finally put her final thoughts, reflections in a very hidden form. We call it not on the tongue. We never say anything like straightforward, especially if you want your book to be published, but you always say that this happened in the past, and you kind of like demonize, like for example Republic of China, like previous government. But we all know what's happening because it's very similar situation. So the government cannot criticize her that, oh, you are talking about us. She could say that I'm talking about that, but it kind of like worked like that in the past, but not anymore after 2017. So this is her last fiction or novel called Golden Shoes, and then I will just like tell you some of her writings from that book I just translated. So on disappearing Uyghur language, she was telling her granddaughter, who was forced to learn only Chinese at school. So she told her that we all were inexperienced facing the current situation, which means in the past. Like we didn't know this is coming. We were unable to imagine the final consequences. Although we were too late waking from the nightmare, it's no longer permitted for us not to do anything anymore. So what she's saying is that we didn't know this was coming, or even if we knew, it was too late. Like we just let it go like that, and probably it is too late, but we still have to do something about it. And then on dangerous political environment, because the East Turkestan, the like political environment is so dangerous that It's even worse than like anywhere you can imagine, maybe even worse than Afghanistan under Taliban, as we know. So she's saying that young people don't know what's coming to them. This is written in 2016, remember. What's happened in 2017 after that. This is almost her prediction. And you will be regretful for being politically deceived and not able to do anything one day soon, but it will be too late. And you young people don't know what's going on right now. You don't know the meaning of homeland. Many nations have been driven out of their lands and faced genocide. May God never make you one of them. So these are, and some other words, for example, she wrote that this is not the first time that we are facing atrocities like that. In 1950s, there were water prisons in Urumqi, and many hundreds of thousands of Uyghurs have disappeared into those prisons, and they're still there. And this is like some words from the walls of that prison, and this is archaeologically true and correct. So
Fatima, we've only got a few more minutes, so
yes,
if you
I
want
have
to
maybe
think about
like 3 slides.
okay, good.
So it says, my name is Sharif Haji. I am from Beshkerem, Kashgar. I don't know what my crime is. May God take me out of this hell and free me from here. And some other things. So this is her last book, and she disappeared in 2018. And also the editor-in-chief for this book, Chimengul Awud, which the Penn International did a lot of advocacy for her. She was taken to the camp because of this book, because she was editor-in-chief. And second one I would like to introduce you is Vahitean Osman. He was born in 1963. This was before his imprisonment, and this just appeared in 2021 in July. The Chinese state media had to put him on the news because a lot of people were asking about him, and then they put him like this, and then they say he committed separatism. That's why he's imprisoned. And yeah, and I'll be reciting his poetry, one of his poetry, The Homeland. He says, the homeland carries us on her shoulders, rests us in her spaces, connects the land and time in her each breath. Higher than the highest is the homeland. Her heart is a mountain, her chest is a mysterious garden. Her vein is a river, her eyes heaven. Her breath is hell, character is blue sky. Her hands are healing, waters are present, or the gift, the holiest of all existence. This is what he wrote. And
it's a very powerful poem.
Thank you. People get imprisoned for writing things like this. And the last one is Shahib Abdusalam Nurbeg. And he was born in 1969, and he's a poet. And I will read, and this is like the Chinese poetry collection that he edited in 2016 also. And although he was trying to be like a mainstream, like, you know, like translating Uyghur poetry to the Chinese and then trying to integrate to the society, but he wasn't also able to escape from this nightmare. So it's the selection from 1,000 Elegies. He said, we grew the carefree evening into night and loosed honeybee within it. Finally, the bowls were filled, they overflowed. We went to drink and found the bowls were empty. So his poetry is more like spiritual, like mystic poetries. And if you're interested, I have some more. For example, I'll just read one more.
Yep.
We were roused from wind horizons, we united. Solitary fruit was scattering without end. Look as it tumbles down, look as we tumble down. And this is all translated by Joshua L. Freeman. He was very
beautiful,
nice.
beautiful. Yeah. Thank you, Fatima. We don't have time to talk about your own personal experience, which perhaps if there's time later around the questions, we can do that. So if anyone has any questions for Fatima, please put them into the chat. We were going to mention, what's the one thing that people can do to try to support these writers, because we can't get any messages directly to them. It's impossible to get anything into Chinese prisons, and we can't write to their families either. But what can people do, Fatima?
So I was thinking maybe we can urge the Australian ambassador in China to write to the Chinese authorities. And I prepared a sample letter. Maybe that's one thing we could do. And be an ally, stop saying Xinjiang or, Chinese Muslims, Uyghur minority. Yeah.
And East Turkestan.
And East Turkestan is the correct.
All right. And so that sample letter, are you able to put that into the chat?
Yes, I will be putting it into the chat.
Great, great.
Thank you.
So yeah, in the chat there, James has said write to the Australian ambassador in China, to write to the Chinese authorities, and also write to the Chinese embassy. It's something that we've been doing at Penn for various prisoners, various writers who are imprisoned. So thank you very much, Fatima. So I'll just tell you a little bit more about little bit more about the history of Penn. First of all, I'll plug the ABC radio program about Uyghur writers, which we'll also put a link in the chat. And Fatima appears in that program, and it's just a fascinating and beautiful listen about how Uyghurs are preserving their language here in Australia. So just a bit about the history of Penn. We were founded in London by a writer called Catherine Amy Dawson Scott, and it was a kind of a fellowship for writers after the devastation of World War I. And over the years, with the rise of fascism and other forms of totalitarianism, it became about protecting free speech. Then in the 1960s, our core work shifted to writers in prison, trying to keep writers out of prison and support them if they were in prison. Courageous, creative people who often speak truth to power. And the history of Penn Sydney, just very, very briefly, we're 90 years old this year, and we were also established by women writers, Mary Gilmore, Ethel Turner, and Dorothea McKellar. And there are also Penn centres in Melbourne and Perth, if you're joining us from either of those centres. Okay, so now I'd like to welcome Mansour Razaghi. Mansour's a journalist, a Walkley-nominated journalist, having worked for the ABC and SBS, and he also has a Kurdish current affairs program on community radio. And he's going to talk about Iran and what's going on there with persecuted writers. And if we get time, also Kurdish journalists in Iraq. There are currently 81 of them on a hunger strike in prison. But it's important to, before we talk about Iran and the Iranian writers, it's important to understand the context. So let's go right back 40 years to the so-called Iranian Revolution. Mansour, you've got some very interesting background to share with us.
So, look, I believe I've got 11 minutes, so I'll take you through a history and be with me. And I was about to share some photos. I'm not sure if he said with the limited time that I have, I would be able to. But
actually, Mansour, you've got 15 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Iranian Writers Association right now have been under pressure since their existence in 1968. And right now, a couple of the members in prison, and it's a huge campaign, and mainly by Penn centers around the world supporting them, and they are very, very appreciative of these efforts and also this support. In 1968, the Iranian Writers Association, established by a couple of writers and poets in Iran, and it was a dictatorship in Iran, of course, Shah King regime supported by the West and suppressing all the freedoms and any oppositions. And at that time, a couple of writers and poets that were in jail and also tortured, and some of them were killed, and including Khosrow Gulbarkhi in 1974. It was famous because his trial became an international kind of platform for the opposition, because for the first time under human rights, regime allowed the international media, or the media came to the trial, and he used that stage and he defended himself, not that much himself, but he was talking about the whole country, the situation and freedom of expression, other things. And after that, he was executed with a couple of other people. And after that, in 1979, Shah regime, the king, the monarchy collapsed, and the revolution. I would like to take you back and the audience back to that era. And this is very important. Right now, we are dealing with Afghanistan. 11th September coincide with very two important point in history. First, 11th September in Chile, that was supported by CIA, and they overthrown the legitimate, democratic, elected government. And just, I believe it was last week, 2 weeks ago, it was revealed, and Australian security kind of ASIO, kind of ISIS, I believe, I don't remember the name, involved in helping the dictatorship, and 11 September in Afghanistan as well. So I wanted to come back to these kind of policies that the Western America and its allies going around the world leave nothing but misery, and including that one in Iran. What I would like to link it with Afghanistan, because at that time, it was a green belt created by the West and America and its allies around Soviet Union, which the most important part, of course, was Iran, Turkey, and Afghanistan, and then Pakistan as well. And they were part of CENTO Pact. And this green belt ideology goes back to late 19th century, early 20th century, the Lord Curzon, that he created Muslim nexus of states around expanding of, at that time, Russia, but later on with the Bolshevik Revolution, they wanted to have a green belt around it. In 1979, Afghanistan collapsed, and we know the history, that you know how later on Reagan and Thatcher, and they went supported the Mujahideen and created this chain of Islamic fundamentalist forces in the region. And also, it was a massive forces in Iran within people with a socialist kind of leftist leniency. So in 1979, in January 1979, the group of, now we call them G7, at that time, America, UK, West Germany, and France get together in Guadeloupe summit. They decided, they said, it is very dangerous. We need someone. Shah, the king, is no good use for us. So they went and they made a pact with Ayatollah Khomeini. They moved him from Baghdad to France, and they brought him to power with the, you know, with a promise: do not touch the military, and also crash down all the progressive leftist movement in Iran. And exactly he did. And when it came in Iranian Writers Association, of course, it was in the first, they were in their target, and they started crashing down Iranian Writers Association. So in Shah regime, they never had time to practice. In Islamic regime as well, after a couple of years, they came down and they started killing him. One of them was Saeed Sultanpur, the very famous poet, and he was arrested on his wedding night when he was dancing with the bride. They went there, and it was in 1981 exactly. Less than 2 years, the regime came to power, arrested him. After 66 days, bloody torture, they killed him, they executed him. And after that, it came down to this cracking down on Iranian Writers Association came down until they didn't allow anyone, of course. So many of members arrested, killed, tortured. And one of the main things came is 1996, 1998, which is called a chain murder of Iran, or serial killing of the writers and the intellectuals. Within those years, 80 people at least were killed. and before that, even some other people were killed. And after because it became a very big scandal, and Iranian security force and the judiciary system, they had no choice, that came out and they said, okay, in 1998, they accepted the blame. They said, we do it. And they made a kind of kangaroo trial. But Dr. Nasser Zarafshan, who is the member of IWA himself, and he's a lawyer, academist, he was representing the families. Just 10 days before the trial started, arrested, jailed for 5 years, and 50 slashes. And through those chain killing, so many members of the IWA were killed, and of course, they were tortured, and they were assassinated. They were killed. And now we are in the past 2 years again. The couple of cases came about. One of them is the trial Reza Khandan Mahabati, Baktash Abdin, Kayvan Bajan. Both three of them just to write a book and participate in writing a book about history of Iranian Writers Association, and gather on the grave of a very famous poet in Iran, Shamalu. They sentenced them collectively for 13 and a half years. And in fact, 2 days, in 2 days time, 27th of September, it is their anniversary. And they have been awarded by Penn America the Freedom Writers Award. And it will be, I believe, on the first week of October. It is a gala ceremony for them. And also Arash Ganji for translating a book about, it's a series of essay of a couple of writers talking about Rojava, or their resistance of Kurdish in Syria. He's been imposed with 11 years. He's not been he hasn't been arrested, going to jail, but he's been sentenced to 11 years. Any minutes he can be.
And the other three, they're in Evan prison, which is a pretty notorious jail.
Notorious jail, and also very, very bad jail, since it's a legacy of Shah regime as well. So all these things you can think about it. They are not in a very good shape, and freedom of expression does not exist. And in fact, Reporters Without Borders ranked Iran among 180 countries, 174.
Wow.
For freedom of expression.
Yeah.
And so many. And of course, it's another thing is really the judge that sentenced the trial of Reza Baktash and Kayvan to 13 and a half years. The judge, actually, he is the judge, the same judge in 1988, was part of the Commission of Death that, by the decree of Ayatollah Khomeini, they killed 5,000 political prisoners in 6 weeks' time. And he's the same judge, and his assistants right now actually in trial in Sweden.
Yeah, tell us that story, because that's one that is possibly has some good news.
Okay, that one is really very interesting story. His name is Hamid Nouri. He was the assistant of that judge, the judge named Moqisa, and he was lured into a trap in Sweden by the former prisoner that he tortured. And he found out, okay, he's coming to Sweden. So he went to London from Sweden, that ex-prisoner, and he spoke to a lawyer, and they studied, okay, he said part of the international jurisdictions they can do, they can charge him. This is an international law, exists everywhere. and they lured him to a nice trip to Sweden, from Sweden to Spain to Italy, and also with a promise of women, extravaganza trips. And when he arrived, he was arrested immediately in the Stockholm airport, and since last November, and right now for the past 6 weeks, the trial has started and so many witnesses came forward. And he's the same assistant judge, and the main judge, he's in Iran, and he imposed that hefty penalty on the writers in Iran.
Well, let's hope that they're successful in Sweden in prosecuting someone who clearly, committed so many crimes against humanity. We've run out of time, Mansour, to speak about the journalists in
I made
Iraq.
it in 12 minutes.
But thank you, well done. And if anyone has any questions for Mansour, please put them in the chat, and we'll be able to answer them later. So just a little bit more about Penn before we move on to our next speaker. So we organise a couple of activities every year, 2 major events. In May, there's a talk given at the Sydney Writers' Festival that we organise around freedom of expression. It's called the Free Voices Lecture, often given by a journalist or human rights luminary. And the other one happens in May around I said that one was in May, the other one's in November, around the Day of the Imprisoned Writer. This year, we're going to be having an event at the MCA. We can't tell you anything more about it, but it'll be mid-November and very special. We also put out a magazine twice a year, and we also lobby or push around issues in Australia as well, censorship, because of course we're not immune from it here. Witness the federal police raids on the ABC. So that's actually something that Penn International, our sort of mother body, are worried about in terms of freedom of speech in Australia. But now I'd like to introduce Dragana Zivancevic. Like all of us here tonight, she's also on the Penn Management Committee. She's a translator from English, Serbian and Spanish, and a freelance higher education professional. And she's also on the Penn International Translation and Linguistic Rights Committee. Now, you're going to read us a very moving story written by a 19-year-old woman in Kabul, just days after Kabul fell. The story came to us through another committee member, Kieran Kresovic Salazar. It's from the online magazine, The Archipelago, that he's involved with. The Archipelago publishes writing and art from migrant and refugee writers globally. And it actually began in the refugee camps of West Java. So Dragana, I'd love to hear the story. Are you there, Dragana? Is Dragana there?
He's on mute.
Yes, sorry,
Great.
somebody muted me.
Okay.
Diary from Kabul. I had many dreams. I'm a girl. I'm 19 years old. I'm from Kabul. I'm from Afghanistan. I started school when I was a young girl. I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to build my country. On August 15, 2021, I was shocked by seeing the white flags on the National Army vehicles on the streets in Kabul city. I saw the white flag on the presidential palace on television. By dragging down the Afghan national flag with 3 beautiful colors, our hearts cried out. In fact, no one believed that the Taliban could take control over the biggest city in Afghanistan, where there were thousands of troops with tight security. Many people said that it is impossible, that the capital of Afghanistan collapsed without any resistance. The neighbors, with tears on their faces, were telling us that the Taliban are in the city center. We locked the doors behind. We stopped what we were doing, a big tragedy that I just knew by name before, the Taliban, the first day of the Taliban. No one could do anything except stay at home and follow the news on television. Our hearts were beating loud, but no one could hear them. Our eyes zoomed in on TV screens, rolling from one side to the other. It was quiet everywhere and every street empty. Every door was shut. My friends are so depressed now. We are a group of girls and we are best friends. I'm worried about them and myself. There is a girl in our group. She's an athlete. She has been going to Wushu club for years. She prepared herself for a big competition. She is a strong girl. She has many medals. The club is so proud of her. Unfortunately, he has to stay at home. She missed her chance to be a champion. I also go to the same club, but I can't go anymore. One of the girls from our group got a chance to go to Qatar by American plane. She is happy to save her life, but we are trapped in Afghanistan. During 20 years, we worked hard and many good people sacrificed themselves for their country. We have many orphans, many women lost their husbands, many mothers and fathers lost their sons in battlefield. Many people became disabled by horrible bomb blasts. But suddenly, everything changed in different ways by the coming of the Taliban. There was no war in Kabul city, but the faces looked like coming from the battlefield. Now, a beautiful city like Kabul, where we could see men and women walking down the city center, which made it a colorful city, is like a ghost city after the Taliban arrived. We cannot see any old women going shopping, young women going to work, not even the happy little girls with their beautiful bags running to school. Before, I used to walk happily in the same streets with my normal clothes, and I had fun with my classmates, but there is no more happy times. The people are silent when I look in their eyes. I feel their fear. To have a normal life. We felt like the birds out of cages, but now we are in the cage again. Many people do not want to go back to the cages. That's why they are trying to get out from Kabul airport to unknown destinations. I was shocked when I saw the crowds in the airport flying the American military aircraft on television. The people were running and shooting. Some of them even sat on the aircraft tires. It was unbelievable that the airplane took off while some were still holding onto the plane. It was like the Titanic movie to me. But there is one difference. In the film, the children and women had a chance to be rescued first. But in Afghanistan, life does not matter. The people who left Afghanistan, I wish them good luck. But what will happen to those who are left behind? As a teenage girl, I think this is the end of the world for me. I do not know how to get back to normal life. What should I do with my dreams that I had when I was so young?
Yeah. Can't really say much more after that, can you?
I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dragana. So you're going to tell us a little bit now about what Penn does with translation and linguistic rights.
Linguistic rights, yes. I would like actually to start by reading just the first paragraph of the Penn Charter. Penn affirms that literature knows no frontiers and must remain common currency among people in spite of political or international upheavals, describing these days on this planet as well. But implicitly, just in this first paragraph, there is the implicit need for translation for that currency to work effectively. We need translations to bridge the linguistic barriers between different peoples, different cultures, different literatures. So Penn itself actually is founded in London, had English as the only language of its international activities. Gradually, the French was added, and much later on, the Spanish as well. And the committee, the Translation and Linguistic Rights Committee, was founded in the late 70s. And we believe that all languages and literatures have the right to be written, read, and heard, whether spoken by billions of people across the world or by just small communities. We also strongly believe that linguistic diversity is a world heritage that must be valued and protected. Respect for all languages and cultures is fundamental to the process of constructing and maintaining dialogue and peace in the world. The right to use and protect one's own language must be recognized by the United Nations and one of the fundamental human rights. And that has been the main goal of the work of Translation and Linguistic Rights Committee on the global level. So the promotion of linguistic rights is a central, or one of the central pillars of Penn's work. And Penn is committed to the respect of all languages, and that also includes the protection and promotion of minority languages, as well as of the languages of the First Nations in many parts of the world. So we had the last two Penn International presidents actually putting a lot of emphasis and supporting greatly the Translation and Linguistic Rights Committee. So that was John Holston Saul, a Canadian author, and Jennifer Clements, an American-Mexican author and current outgoing international president. So over the past 12 years, we saw both of them served 2 terms. So over the past 12 years, we saw the creation of many new Penn centers, such as Penn Delhi in India, et cetera, or the rehabilitation and revival of some older ones, like the one in the Philippines, and then Argentina, Bolivia, or like the one in Perth, in Western Australia, which stopped working for a while, but it's back in full speed.
Yeah, going strong.
Going very strong.
That's terrific.
I was a member of that center when I first joined Penn.
Yes.
And when I actually started working with the Translation and Linguistic Rights Committee towards drafting the Universal Declaration of Linguistic Rights.
Wonderful, thank you.
So, do I have some more time?
No, you've run out of time. I'm sorry, but thank you for reading that the story so beautifully and for telling us about linguistic rights. And I'm sure if anyone has any questions.
Right now, there is a tremendous push towards indigenous languages.
Yeah.
And the work has been concentrated on Latin America. But I hope that soon the focus will shift on Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific region, and that includes Australia as well.
Yes,
to support the languages of the First Nations.
I mean, I do know that Penn Melbourne does some work with Barkindji people, and so that's that's going on from Penn Melbourne, and it's obviously something that we should get involved with as well in all that spare time.
Maybe all 3 centers should join forces. To gain strength and in the area.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Dragana. Now I'd like to introduce Mark Isaacs. Mark's a writer and a PhD candidate, and he was also president of Penn Sydney for 3 years until recently. And he's the author of The Kabul Peace House, which I've almost finished reading. Congratulations. It's a wonderful book. Such an insight into Afghanistan at a very grassroots level. So tell me what the book's about.
Sure. First, I'd just like to say thanks to all the other committee members who've spoken. It's been wonderful to hear you all share these incredible stories. And I'll also share my screen just so you can see some images of Afghanistan while I'm talking. And hopefully, is that sharing the same thing?
No, it's not. We're not seeing an image. We're seeing something
So
that says that you're screen sharing.
let's try this. No, is that
Don't
working?
worry about it. Let's just move on to the discussion.
Sure. Okay, so the book is the idea for the book began in about 2016. I traveled to Afghanistan with the Edmund Rice Centre, looking at, we were investigating deportations. So what happens when the Australian government rejects a person who's come to Australia seeking asylum and then determines that person needs to be deported to Afghanistan. And at that time, Australia was saying that Kabul was a safe zone which you could deport people to, even though the rest of the country was at war. And so in doing these investigations, I got introduced to a group of Afghan peace activists, and they were Afghan-based, Afghan-led a group that involved young men and young women, mainly high school students and university students, and their philosophy was about inter-ethnic cooperation. So they wanted to have a grassroots, community-led approach to building peace. So that meant,
and that inter-ethnic thing is significant. Before I read your book, I just didn't realise the level of lack of understanding, lack of trust, and sort of almost animosity that there is between all the different ethnic groups in Afghanistan. I guess I knew about the Hazaras, but I didn't know about so much else that there is there.
Yeah. So for Afghanistan's been at war for at least 5 decades now, ever since or just over 4 decades, ever since the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. But even before that, there's a long history of kind of ethnic rivalry, and the conflict has, or the conflicts over the past few decades have deepened those divides, and has led to suspicion between different ethnic groups. And that can be because, depending on which side you fought for in each of the wars, whether there's blood feuds between different groups, whether there's if you're from a different religious sect, being Shia or Sunni, and so there's quite a lot of division between ethnic groups. And
how does that play out in the lives of these young people?
Yeah, so for the young people who I was speaking to, they were, the idea was that there would be a mix of different ethnic groups in the community. But let's take an example of some of the Hazara people who grew up in a kind of predominantly Hazara, Tajik area of Afghanistan. They were so suspicious of the other ethnic groups that they thought Tajik people, if one of the young men, Hafizullah, for example, saw a Tajik person on the street, he might come to blows with that person. There was such animosity. And then also for those young Hazara people in that area, they had such little connection with Pashtun people that they thought of all Pashtun people as Talibs. And when they first got introduced to this group and they met Pashtuns for the first time, the Pashtuns said, "No, we've suffered at the hands of the Taliban just as much as you have," and they had to. The whole point of this group was to kind of deconstruct these preconceived ideas they had of each other and of each ethnic group. And so one of the projects they did was sewing little wallets, leather wallets for these groups of young people in Kandahar, which is traditionally the heartland of the Taliban. And in the wallets, they had the word peace sewed into these wallets. And when the young people from Kandahar received these wallets, they said, "We cannot believe that we received these wallets from young people who are traditionally our enemies. This is unbelievable."
It's such a kind of simple act and something that we would, not think twice about, but it clearly, shows the level of animosity there was.
Yeah,
there is.
Yeah, so even within that group, in that area, there were people from the Tajik communities who'd had, family members killed by Hazara, soldiers, and in the Hazara side, they'd had people killed by Pashtun soldiers, and those ethnic rivalries that are deep-seated in people.
And it's a bold vision that the man who put the house together has in San, in a land that war has just been their lives since forever, really, since certainly in the lifetimes of these young people. He decides to try to forge something for peace and even people don't even understand the concept. Tell me about Insan.
Yeah, so Insan was a doctor who originally kind of found his calling in Pakistan, where he saw the magnitude of the Afghan refugee crisis and realized that something needed to be done. And so he traveled into the heart, like the center of Afghanistan, to work in rural communities. And when he was there, he realized that despite all of these other issues of health issues that were ongoing there, the biggest issue people had was they were tired of having their family members killed in war. And he met a grave digger who said, there's just too much work. And so he theorized that in order to help Afghans in Afghanistan, he needed to come up with a way to build peace. And the best way to build peace was to mend those ethnic divides and kind of build peace within communities. But on top of that, they also wanted to have a kind of climate justice agenda because of the climate crisis that had been enveloping Afghanistan. And they essentially had like a philosophy of saying, we want to build a green, equal, non-violent world without war. And obviously, in a place like Afghanistan, that's a really ambitious concept, but it's also quite a dangerous one, because issues of equality, be it gender equality, ethnic equality, religious equality, those things challenge structural power hierarchies. It challenges the religious powers, it challenges the political powers, and it challenges just familial powers. And so, when you're talking about giving people like Hoja, one of the main characters, the opportunity to be educated at university, there are a number of people within our own family even that were against this, and that put many of these young people at risk for their lives.
And I was really struck by a moment when Hoja went to India and she noticed something very different. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so there was a lot of things she noticed about going to India, but there was this one key moment where there was just something she couldn't quite put a finger on. It took her a few days to work it out. And eventually she realized that she wasn't fearing that she might be shot or blown up or killed. And so she wasn't fearing this like level of violence that has become a daily occurrence in Afghanistan. But apart from that, she was amazed to see all these different religious organizations and, like different religious buildings operating side by side. And, for her perspective, there wasn't much conflict compared to somewhere like Afghanistan, where it's predominantly a Muslim country. And she also just thought it was amazing how green the country was, because, for many parts of Afghanistan, they don't get such a green environment as it was India.
Okay, so perhaps choose one of those young people and tell us about their life.
Yeah, so I think I'll stick with Hoja because she's a fascinating character, and the group originated in the mountains of central Afghanistan, in these rural areas.
The group that's in the Peace House in Kabul.
The Peace House, yeah, the Kabul Peace House, and then they eventually moved to Kabul to become, I guess, a bigger. Well, there's a lot of reasons, and you can read the book to find the kind of more nitty gritty details. But in those rural areas, when we hear about the kind of more progressive Afghanistan, that tends to be places like Kabul, Herat, and Mazar Sharif, the big cities. In the rural parts of Afghanistan, it has always been and remains a very conservative country. And so for someone like Hoja, she was expected to get married by the age of about 13 and then remain in the house from then on. She was expected to finish school at that age and really, wasn't really encouraged, or women in that area weren't really encouraged to get educated. But for Hoja, she had always kind of dreamed of that, and her father had promised, and been a big advocate for her to get educated. And so she thankfully had the support of her family and ended up going to university in Kabul. And she was the first person in her village to be first woman in her village to be university educated. But when she got to Kabul, her experience of university
it was a pretty unsatisfactory experience.
And so she actually joined the peace community and found that to be the place where she encountered radical ideas, radical thoughts, things that challenged societal expectations, which is something that she was doing already. And she started to open her mind to different experiences. And what kind of came full circle for me was when I was talking to one of the other younger women in the group, And she said she had joined the community or had gone to visit the community, which was a daring experience for her because she had to take a bus all on her own to the other side of the city, which she doesn't usually do. And she snuck out from her family. And when she arrived, she saw Hojar there, and Hojar was addressing everyone, this crowd of students in such a confident manner. She was so intelligent and brave, and she said, I want to be like her. And that convinced her to keep going. And that's what keeps on going through the community.
Mark, there's a lot more to talk about, but I guess we're going to finish up by tell us what's happened to those young people. You met them 5 years ago, and now what's happened since the Taliban have taken over?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, with everything we've discussed, the ideas that they are promoting challenge the philosophies of the Taliban and other kind of extremist and armed groups. And so all of the community members I've spoken with are extremely fearful of what will happen to them under a Taliban regime. Many of them escaped before the Taliban, or some of them, I should say, escaped before the Taliban swept through the rest of the country. Most of them remain stuck in Afghanistan. One of the young men, Horse, who's one of the main characters in the book, tried to escape via Iran and was turned away at the border by Iranian border guards and then was shot in the back of the legs and ended up in hospital. Other people like Hojar have managed to escape and are in Pakistan. That's only a few people, and we've been trying to assist them in whatever ways we can. Another young woman from the community managed to escape with a 2-week-old baby and spent about 4 days on the road with very little water or food, but they deemed that a better option than remaining in Afghanistan. So
she did get out.
She made it to Pakistan, but getting to Pakistan is only temporary safety. But main characters like Muslim Yor, Horse, and Hafizullah remain in Kabul. And I just received a message from Hafizullah saying, "We just don't know what to do. We could die at any moment." So there's a big risk for these people, and it's just really unclear what will happen under the Taliban regime.
It's frightening. Thank you, Mark. I should also let you know that Penn Sydney is also trying to get a humanitarian visa for a young couple who are both journalists, and can't tell you anything more about them because we have to protect their security quite severely. But if anyone wants to send a message to that young journalist, please put it in the chat, and we'll be very happy to pass it on to her. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about the other stuff that Penn does, in particular around the imprisoned writers, and then we're going to go to questions. So if a writer's imprisoned anywhere in the world, then a local Penn centre will alert Penn International, who then investigate their case. And if they confirm that they're a writer of some note and that they are imprisoned for their writing, then they're put onto the Penn case list, which is more than 1,000 writers on it. It's pretty sobering reading. There are Cuban rappers and Ugandan novelists and a Bangladeshi photographer, just to name a few, lots and lots of writers and journalists as well. And we've done it a few times in Australia. We've one of the Penn centres in Australia has got writers onto that list, largely asylum seekers, and the most famous, of course, being Behrouz Boochani. And other activity that we're involved with in terms of advocating for imprisoned writers, we've been writing letters to embassies in Canberra for Myanmar, Vietnam, and China. We released statements about writers imprisoned in Iran and Kurdistan recently. And if there's an Australian writer in prison, then we take up their case in a big way. We advocated, along with lots of others, for the release of Kylie Moore Gilbert, and a prominent case that we're dealing with is young Heng Jun. You can see a photo of him there, an Australian who's imprisoned in China. We worked to get him onto the Penn International case list. Yang has written spy novels set in China and commentary about Chinese security. He used to actually work for the Chinese Security Service. And he was imprisoned almost 3 years ago on charges of espionage, but spying for who, about what? The Chinese government hasn't made that clear. and he's been given no access to his family and minimal access to consular support and his lawyer. It's been reported that he's been subject to something called the tiger chair, where you're basically trapped in a chair for hours on end. Yep, that's what it looks like. And his health is failing. In May, he was finally tried. The trial lasted less than 7 hours. It was held in secret, and he's yet to be sentenced, but he could be facing life imprisonment. So we've been writing to the Australian government, the Chinese government, and we've released statements condemning his imprisonment. Another thing we do is we try to get messages to writers. It's often very difficult to get the letters into prison, but even if the prison receives the letters, but they don't pass them on to the prisoner, that's significant, because then the writers know that, or the guards and the prison authorities know that someone's watching that prisoner, and it can mean that they can often get better treatment. So if you'd like to send a message, I mean, we didn't get to tell you much about the 3 Iranian writers in prison, but if you have a message of solidarity or support that you'd like to send to them, please do put it in the chat. As we mentioned, we can't send messages to anyone in a Chinese jail, but yeah, if you want to send messages to the Iranian writers, we do have quite close contact with them as much as is possible. So do put it in the chat. And also, we hope one day when we're all allowed to gather again, we can have a letter writing event where we can all gather together and write messages on the back of postcards that we can send to imprisoned writers, because they need our support. They really appreciate our support. We're told that again and again, and it's an important activity. So I actually don't know whether there are any questions. I know the questions were going to be sort of fed to me, but I'm not sure that there have been any questions that have been asked. Just the one comment from Aisha. I just heard about the genocides that Hazaras experienced between 1880 and 1901 that's commemorated on the September 25th. And no, I hadn't heard about that. Australians haven't heard about that. Well, we can wrap up there, or something we could continue with. We didn't get a chance to ask Fatima about her own personal experience with her family. Fatima, would you be interested in speaking about that?
Sure, yeah, just very shortly.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy for me to prepare this conversation, the presentation, because every time when I speak about Uyghurs, it's not only just I'm speaking about my people or my homeland, but it's also like so much close to my heart, because my father, he died in the camp. So he disappeared in 2016 on 25th of April, and then I never heard back from him until I started inquiring from the United Nations enforced disappearance group. And finally, after a year and a half of constant inquiries, they finally replied to me, because they were talking to the Chinese government, and then the government finally issued an official statement about my father and my family members, that my father has passed away in 2018, 18th of November. And they did not say, of course, in the camp, but I know he was taken to the camp because nobody could find him. And then he died of, based on that UN letter, he died of severe pneumonia and tuberculosis, which he never had those health issues. He had hypertension and diabetes. And as we all know, maybe you don't, but I know that in the camps, there is no medical treatment of like any kind. And this also like relates to COVID too. Like if anyone caught COVID virus in the camp, the solution is death. So my father was he wasn't allowed to have any medical support. So using my very cruel word, he was just slowly dying in the prison. And we don't know, like my family, I never spoke to my family for like 5 years now, because if I speak to them on the phone or on the internet or anywhere back in East Turkestan, they would be taken to the camp, because that's a crime to have a relative overseas, because we are seen dangerous to the Chinese regime. We are open-minded people and we are danger to their regime. So my family, and we are cut off from the, like completely cut off from the family. So my family, they also didn't talk about my father's death until last year. And I also don't know how his body was, I don't know.
We've just received a question. Are the Uyghurs the only Muslim group in China? Do you know
No,
the
not
answer?
really. Not really. There are Uyghurs are one of the major ones, but there's also another major group called Hui. They're called Huizu. They speak Chinese. Their language is Chinese, and but they're also Muslims. Also, there are other Turkic ethnicities like Kyrgyz, Kazakh, Tajik, Tatar, and all these Turkic or Persian ethnicities are also Muslims.
And Loretta has sent a lovely message saying that many people in Australia are praying for your family. Yeah, well, thank you, Fatima, for sharing that very personal story. And I guess it really shows people just the situation of Uyghurs, and to hear it from that first person experience is very sobering, and yeah, touches our hearts. Thank you. Well, that's it. Thank you. I'd like to thank all the speakers tonight, and also to Dragana particularly for pushing us to be part of Raising Peace, and especially to the Raising Peace people. James, you've been fantastic with the tech and very supportive, and I hope you've all enjoyed this evening and learned something. And if any of you would like to get involved with Penn, we're always looking for members. I have to say, right now, our website is down. We don't know why. But can we ask you, maybe in a week or so, look for us, Penn Sydney, if you Google that, and become a member. You get our magazine twice a year for that, and as well as that, you can get involved in the activities that we're engaged with. And if you believe in free speech and freedom of expression, then please do join us. So thank you. On behalf of Penn Sydney, thanks everyone.
Thank you, Claudia.
Okay, good night.
Bye. Good night, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.